Hello again, this is UML Operator. In our last session, we learned what a use case is, used for, and why use use cases. In that session, I took you to the EA examples project, and we went to the UML behavioral diagrams, and in that, we went to use cases, and from there, we drilled down into one of my favorite use cases, which is manage users. So today we're actually going to export this diagram, this project, this package out. I'm going to go at the behavioral diagrams. We're not going to step through these diagrams. I really want to focus on use cases only and this particular use case for this session. All right, you can skip to the next chapter if you're not interested, but I'm going to export the UML behavioral diagrams package or namespace out of the EA example project. So we're going to hit Control, Alt, and E, and we're going to use the native format, EXEA, it's just faster, and we're going to go out to this path, so I'm ready to go. We're going to hit Export, and that is done. Now what we're going to do is go over to our demo project that we used for these video sessions and import this in. All right, we're over in our demo project in SQL. And I'm going to import this under this package right here, use cases. So I'm going to Control, Alt, and I. And we're going to go out and grab the file that we just imported. This one right here, this XEA file. And I'm going to hit Open. We're not going to strip GUIDs, never strip GUIDs unless you know what you're doing, because we want to utilize and manage the same global unique IDs. Now, in this particular case, this might be an exception because I don't want these to be the same UIDs as the example. So we're going to strip GUIDs and leave everything else. Hit import, and it's bringing it in now, and it is complete. Let's hit close. And now we have those models. We're going to go to use cases, and we're going to open up manage use cases. Let's go to pan and zoom, make this thing fit a little better. And we're ready to get started. Okay, as stated earlier, Sparx has provided us probably one of the best use case examples that I've seen in the industry. And I watch a lot of YouTube, watch people create use cases or try to teach use cases. I read a lot of books on use cases, and they don't come up to what I believe a use case should be and how it should be approached. But Sparx Enterprise Architect did it, and they especially did it in this particular example. So why do I say this is a great use case example? Number one, it is under a scope or system boundary that most of us are familiar with. Whether you're thinking about Amazon when it became an online bookstore or something else, right? So we can relate to this. Now I could critique it a little bit. I don't like using the term client. I like using the term user or consumer or customer, but that's fine. Administrator, I'm not sure, this is really an administrator. You can give agents administrative rights to do things like delete users. But other than that, it's enough to work with and get started. So we're going to make a couple of changes as we're going forward. The other thing is that it represents use cases. It allows us or teaches us how to view composite models. That's what this infinity sign or horizontal 8 is. You can actually drill down into this into a composite diagram, and we'll close that. Same with create account. And we're going to focus pretty much on create account. I'm going to go ahead and double click it. And here you see a composite diagram that's a communication diagram. And it's a great example of what to do if you're in a drawing tool. Not necessarily Sparx, because there's nothing underneath, there's no notes underneath this use case, and Sparx allows us to do that. Instead, you're focused on a picture or a diagram that has the notes in a note element, and I've shown you how to create various note elements. It also doesn't take advantage of scenarios at this particular level. So if I go back here and I right click and I open up properties, we're going to learn how Sparx approaches scenarios. So scenarios here, they bulleted out what the scenarios is. We can open up the structured editor, and you can see they're stepping through a scenario. that's actually working with exceptions and all. Here's an exception. Here's alternate flow. Here's another exception leading to ends. Both of these are leading to ends. And I teach you a little bit about scenarios, how to build scenarios, and we'll continue to do that. But more powerfully is you can create activity diagrams automatically from your scenarios. And even more important than that, you can start building your test cases for your use cases. So Sparx takes this a lot further than your typical drawing tools. And Sparx is just letting you touch on the power of Sparx. In our next video session, we're going to get into actually creating what I call effective use cases. I don't want to say this is not an effective use case, but if we were to run a report, and I'll do that a little bit later on this diagram, let's just look at whether you as a reader is getting the information you need as effectively as possible. So let's get to breaking this particular use case down. And when I say break this use case down, this actually has multiple use cases in it, in a boundary system or scope element. I'm going to go ahead and right click on this and make it selectable. So when I select it, you know what I'm talking about. But this is a use case model, use case diagram, and often you'll just refer to me as calling this whole thing a use case, because I'm looking at it from what I believe is the primary actor in this use case, and that's the customer. The client is what they've tagged it, not necessarily the agent down here below. The agent to me is a secondary actor. All right, let's look at the first thing, and that's the actor. What I'm going to do is select this and hit Alt and G. It's going to take me right to the actor package under use cases. And this is best practices. If you're following the Open Group Architecture Framework or TOGAF, you build an actor catalog. And in this case, you see they have started to build their actor catalog. And that's the very first thing you do is understand your actors when you're starting a project. Who are the actors? And at the enterprise level, you can have between 37 and 60 actors that are playing a part in your program, your system architecture, or whatever, right? In this case, we're just calling out 2 actors. It's fine to start there, right? But the first thing that I want to do is I want to rename client. So I'm going to just do it here, double click on it, or I could do this in properties. So what we're doing is we're opening this up, and I'm going to call this consumer. So we change the name, and you can see in the actor package or catalog, it changed the name. Second thing I want to do is administrator. So I'm going to hit F2, and I can change the name this way. Just edit it to agent. Or I wanted to, if I go to properties, I could have changed the name right here under name. So when I change these names in the actor catalog, now administrator is agent, customer is consumer. I'll definitely need to add in an administrator later, but you saying administrator is a bit ambiguous because you've got a database administrator, you've got server administrator, you have administrators all over the place that have the highest possible change approval credentials. In other words, they can literally delete, they can access data that they're allowed to on customers and other things that you certainly wouldn't allow a consumer or your customer to get to, or even your highest level agents. So administrators, I don't like using administrator unless you're very clear on what that role is or who that actor is when you're building your use cases. But we'll talk more about that in later sessions. Now, because we have namespaces turned on, you can see this actor is in a package or namespace called actors. And you could double click in the package here, go to diagrams, and you could show namespaces. You can turn that off and it won't show. But when you're doing initial modeling, unless you need to do that for presentation reasons or collaborations, I would leave namespaces on while you're initially creating your models and your diagrams, right? So you know that this is in a package or namespace called actors. Let's pick our login use case, and we're going to hit Alt-G to very quickly find it in our browser, and my browser is over on the right side. And this particular use case for login is under manage users. And you can see I have 2, 4, 6, 7 use cases that are under this namespace, right? So I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to hit Alt-G, instantly find it in the browser. And we're going to focus on this use case and everything that is a composite or under this. So I'm not going to go through all these use cases. I'll let you go to EE example project file and go to this model and play around with that yourself. But we're just going to go right over to create account use case and talk more about this one. Before we dive deeper, I'm going to go back over to the EA example and I want to show you something. So we're going to open up use case diagrams. We're going to go to this and we're going to select create account. I have traceability turned on, showing you how to get to traceability. It's in the lower right for myself. So when I select this, I see everything that create account is related to, the relationship associated to, relevant to. So it owns these things, it implements these things, it's realized by these things, it's used from a client perspective, and we change it to consumer over in our demo project, and it's needed by account, all right? So you see this where it says implements. I did not bring in the requirements. So when we go back over to our project, you're not going to see its relationship or traceability to specific requirements. So in this session, we told you that we were going to teach you when to use cases, and you use them in the very beginning of any ideation, any project, any initiative. You get an inventory of your actors, you get an inventory of your use cases. You'll wrap those use cases under various scope and system, use diagrams, use case models, but you want to get an inventory of your use cases. And you start building your requirements. And I'm going to show you as we're going forward how you do that from inside a use case. These are external. So if I go out to this and I say, find in a diagram, find in which diagram, I can go to various diagrams where these may be. Let's go to this traceability and see what's here. So I open it up. Here's this relevant to this use case. So you can tell all sorts of stories in your traceability model relevant to your requirements and your use cases. So the EA example, again, just an absolutely wonderful learning set of models to help you get started. But let's roll back over to our demo project. So before I get there, when to use cases? From the beginning. Why do you use cases? You're using them to develop your scope. Here's the scope element right here, the scope of the system, right? And you use it to develop your requirements relevant to your scope as you're going forward. And it's agile, it's an iteration, so you can do it from the use case itself, or you can start inventorying your requirements, which I show you in another video, from external to your elements and building requirements. So how do you build a use case? As I stated earlier, the very first thing you start with is your actor or your actors. And you don't have to put them in the package right away. You can do it right in your use case diagram. So you created a use case diagram. You all should know how to do that now. You have your use case tooling. You bring in your first actor. The next thing you do is you bring in your scope and you name that scope, right? This is the system that's in focus in this use case model. The next thing you do is you bring in any other actors that you believe are playing a part, and you can always remove them. You can always delete them from the diagram, but you want to just inventory your actors while you're talking about scope, right? So the next thing you do is you start bringing in your use cases. Just ovals, you don't have to get carried away. You're going to bring in your use cases. So first thing is the consumer, the user has to be able to access your storefront. So they're going to register, they're going to create login credentials, and they're going to start creating an account. The next thing is you're going to want to give them the ability to view account details based on their access credentials after logging in and their authorization. And the next thing you want to do is allow them to close their account. So you got create account, View account and close account. Manage account. Account management 101, right? That's why I love this use case example. So when they're viewing their details, you're going to want to have them view history. So what's going on? What have I ordered? Where are my orders? All of that kind of stuff. And then the ability to view open orders, where they are. I mean, you've all been on Amazon enough to understand the importance of that. So you're working with your stakeholders in the very beginning of the effort, and you're starting to get an inventory of the use cases, the things that are considered in the system or scope of the project or program that you started. And a lot of these use cases, from a case management perspective, from a knowledge management perspective, from a methods and procedures perspective, they may be already existing today. They may be current mode of operation. So you want to inventory these to have the clients understand, well, what do you want to change for the future mode of operations? And the gap between future mode, or FMO, and current mode, or CMO, those are your requirements. So you can very quickly start to develop requirements. The next thing you're going to start to do is bringing in agent support services, whether those actors are humans or whether they're bots, AI. You're going to want to make sure you're having that conversation, especially when they're managing their account and they're closing things, right? So these are the things this is how you create a use case, how quickly, stick figures and ovals and put them inside a boundary for your scope, because you might have conversations, well, this is out of scope, this is out of scope, and you're going to want to move things in and out of scope during your whiteboarding exercises or the conversations that you're having with your client stakeholders. So what makes this a great use case example from Sparx Enterprise Architect? Let's just take the first one, login. You'll notice the infinity sign, or what I like to call the horizontal 8. That means there's a composite model underneath that. That means that if I double click on this, I'm going to another model. And in this case, they're pulling on some class elements. Let me just go ahead and double click this. See, this is a class element. It's not a use case element. So they bring in their actor from their actor catalog. They bring in a class element called login, and they bring in another class element called login account, right? So if I hit Alt-G on these, it takes me to these elements that are under the use case. So they're composite of the login use case and some things to consider, right? So this helps explain how login works, or what we're focused on in scope for login. So when I go in here, hey, we're not talking about anything other than logging into the account. The boundary stereotype, it represents your presentation layer, your view. The control stereotype represents your logic, your code, your APIs, your service layer. And we just want them to log in their account. That's all that's in scope for this particular effort. So it helps explain what the scope is. Let me go ahead and close this. No, I don't need to save. So let's go to create account, and we're going to double click on this one. So there's a composite, and again, you're seeing a boundary, a UI representation, and a class element for create account. And you're seeing a control element stereotyped out, a class element for create new account. So what they're stating here is that the scope of this effort in this particular use case is only on creating account as they're going through, right? And they have some notes in here, which is fine for a picture. It's telling what the basic path is. You can go ahead and read steps 1 through 7, but it's saying what the basic path is, or what sometimes we refer to as the happy path in this particular use case. And then it's starting to put some constraints, some alternatives, so some exceptions, such as no submit, validation fails from login or other reasons, and cannot create account, you see in step 6. So it's explaining, hey, in step 3, this could happen. In step 4, this could happen. Validation can fail. In step 6, this could happen, right? So this is a good use case model with notes. And you can do this in any drawing tool. And I'm not going to mention there's a ton of drawing tools that are out there. You can create these, I want to say cute pictures, in a drawing tool that you could reuse in other things, but they're really not that useful. There's no power of intelligence. It's not explaining what's happening in this event. between this consumer and this user experience, this UI or UX. And there's nothing that's really explaining. If I double click on, there's no notes is explaining what's going on. Even if I go to the message event and I double click on this and I widen the properties for communication, there's really nothing that's explaining to me what's going on. It's just someone put in something called create new account. It's not relevant to any other code or anything else that's going on. So when you're reading this from a picture speaks 1,000 words, hey, we have a customer that's creating an account and they're invoking or utilizing create account or new account function logic in order to do that. But what happens after that? Now let's go to the sequence diagram down here. There's a link they embedded in here. I'm going to go ahead and double click on that. And that's going to take me to the create account sequence diagram, where they brought in an instance of the consumer actor and they've created a sequence diagram. Now, this video is not on sequence diagrams, but when you're reading the sequence diagram, do you get an idea of how create account works? So they select create account command. Is that a button? Whatever is that? But they select that in the presentation layer, the boundary, which invokes a create new account control element. And then there's an exercise that creates that account. And then they submit the new account details to an entity, which is a stereotype that represents your data model backend. So I can go all the way from here, looking at these pictures, to, well, how does the watch tell time? How does the watch work, right? Get down to that level of detail. But is that enough? If you're looking at this, do you understand what's going on in this use case? Can you build requirements, test cases, and so on from this use case? And let's see how far we can go just using Sparx example. All right, let's create a report. I'm not going to do it on all of these use cases. I'm just going to do it on create. So you select what you want to report on, create account. We're going to go to publish. We're going to select the book. It's going to open up a dialog box. We're going to use, let's start with use case summary. So this is a canned template that Sparx gives us. Automatically names the report based off the element that I selected. Let's go ahead and hit generate and publish it to where that is. And it's done that fast. Let's hit view. And you can see here the basic path. It's telling you alternate path, your exceptions. Here's that model on create account diagram. Here's the sequence diagram, right? Here's the basic paths. So this is a lot of pages of information, 5 pages, just on this one use case. But from reading this, and I'll let you do that on your own, do you understand what this use case is? So let me go ahead and close this one. And what we're going to do is go now to all the use cases and see what kind of story they're telling. We're going to click, we're still on Publish tab, Report. This time, we're going to look at set of summary use case details. And we're going to click Generate, step on that previous report if there wasn't, they're called Manage Users. And that's created. We're using the internal viewer. I'm not going out to Microsoft Word to do this, and we're going to select View, all right? So these are all of these use cases. So there's your model, here's your picture, your notes, connections, your preconditions. They've got a constraint, scenarios, step you through scenario, right? A closed diagram, all the subsequent diagrams, all right? There are 23 pages of report here. But is it enough for you to understand what these use cases are about and what they're doing? I'll leave that up to you. I want to say no. I have enough experience where, hey, I can crank out a 21 or 23 page report and then come to the conference call the next day and ask, did anybody read it? Nah, it was too much. I didn't have time. Or, yeah, I read it, but I don't understand it. You're going to have to step through it. Or it just goes on, the excuses. So what you want to do is you want to create your models where your stakeholders don't have to ask you any questions, or they're only asking you the least amount of and most important questions during that engagement. So we've covered a great deal in almost 30 minutes. Normally, this is a 4-hour at least course, depending on the level of experience and capabilities of the students or modelers. But we've covered a great deal. You've learned when to create a use case, and you've learned basically how to create use case diagrams, use cases, and the benefits, because going back to part one, the benefits of creating use cases. So are they effective? Is this effective? It's the most effective that I've seen so far, but it's not effective enough to my standards. And I've been modeling for well over, I don't want to age myself here too much, but 20 years, right? So I actually go back to the late 80s and the early 90s in other tools. UML wasn't born until the late 90s, but I've been modeling for a long time. Use cases have been around a long time, right? So I'm kind of passionate about use cases. That's why I want modelers to learn how to properly build use cases, how to manage those use cases, and create reuse for those use cases. I like that, reuse cases. It's just very important. A lot of tooling out there really doesn't do what Sparx Enterprise Architect does. Now, when I go out and start reviewing and evaluating and teaching other tools, I'm going to show you the difference. And, you pay a little money for Sparx EA, you pay a lot more for other modeling, computer-aided software engineering tools. And you can get some things so-called free, but you have limited capabilities. So you end up getting into some sort of subscription model where in the long run, you're paying for it. The bottom line is labor dollars, the labor of your cost of yourself and the people around you. And when you add it all up, how fast are you delivering what you need to deliver and at what cost? And I think what I've proven many times, if you get the right tool for the right job, you're able to deliver and get a better return on investment in your labor, time, and delivery. Thanks very much for watching this. Talk to you all in the next session, which is going to be part 3 on creating effective use cases. Happy modeling.